baptised. John also was baptising at Arun near Salem because the water was abundant there, and people kept coming and were being baptised. John, of course, had not yet been thrown into prison. Now a discussion about purification arose between John's disciples and a Jew. They came to John and said to him, "Rabbi, the one who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you testified, here he is baptising, and all are going to him." John answered, "No one can receive anything except what has been given from heaven. You yourselves are my witnesses that I said, I am not the Messiah, but I have been sent ahead of him. He who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. For this reason my joy has been fulfilled. He must increase, but I must decrease. The one who comes from above is above all. The one who is of the earth belongs to the earth and speaks about earthly things. The one who comes from heaven is above all. He testifies to what he has seen and heard, yet no one accepts his testimony. Whoever has accepted his testimony has certified this, that God is true. He whom God has sent speaks the words of God, for he gives the Spirit without measure. The Father loves the Son and has placed all things in his hands. Whoever believes in the Son has eternal life. Whoever disobeys the Son will not see life, but must endure God's wrath.
Thanks, Robin. We're continuing on through John. Katie asked me to take this particular passage before I went away, so I had a lot of preparation done before I went away, and I'm very relieved because I've been crook since I've been home, so I only had a couple of days to pull it back together again. But it's a great passage. I wonder if you've ever done something really good that you were proud of and that you were pleased about. Whoops, I meant to just push that one on. Here we go. That you were pleased about, and yet nobody noticed what you had done. You put in all the effort, you did the work, you gave it your best shot, then somebody else came along and got the credit. Now, if we're honest, there's something inside us that really reacts when that happens. I know there certainly is with me. I was going to share an example of that, but I probably won't. It's not something I'm terribly proud of, so I might just leave it. I guess it's human nature, though, isn't it? We want to be seen. We like to be appreciated. We like to be recognised when we do good things. But this morning, we come to John the Baptist, and he says something completely different. John takes that natural instinct and turns it on its head. He says, he must increase and I must decrease. In other words, it's not about me, it's about Jesus. And that simple statement lies at the very heart of genuine Christian discipleship, doesn't it? More of Jesus and less of me. And in this passage, we discover why John could actually say that. How John could say those words with such conviction. And then how they might challenge us today. There are moments in life when something becomes very clear. As we go through life, we have those moments when all of a sudden we get a certain clarity about different things. Sometimes it's through our experiences. Sometimes it happens quickly when we finally realise something about ourselves. And one of those things is the realisation that actually, after all, life is not about me. Sometimes that's not an easy lesson to learn, but it's exactly the lesson that John the Baptist had already learned. In fact, he expresses it in a way that is probably the most powerful and simple sentences in the Bible. John said, "He, Jesus, must increase, but I, John, must decrease." Or as another translation put it, "He must become more important and I must become less important." And in our passage today, this morning, we see how John came to understand that and why it really matters for us today. The story begins with a little bit of tension. I got this great picture in mind. In fact, I dreamt this the other night. So I don't know why I actually dreamt this, and I was actually there in my dream, and it was quite crazy. But the story begins with Jesus and his disciples were baptizing people in the countryside, as Robin read, in Judea. At the same time, John was just up the road a bit. He was continuing to baptize people as well. People started coming to both of them. But John's followers started to get just a little bit concerned. They came to him. I sort of got this picture. They sort of came to him and said, "Hey, Jono, what's going on? You know that guy that you introduced us to down by the Jordan River? He's down there baptizing. Hey, and all those people are going to him. There's more going to him than are coming here to you." They were really concerned. You could almost sense that concern in their voices. They were worried. They were thinking, Jesus is becoming as popular or more popular than John. And they were perturbed by that. But of course, the real issue here is not about popularity, is it? The real problem here is ego. They have begun to see ministry as a competition. Who has the more followers? Who's baptizing the most people? Who's the most successful? And who has the more influence? Sadly, that isn't just their problem. That's ours as well. It's a very human problem, isn't it? When things go well for us, we're really thankful. But when things go well for someone else, and we think we should have got a little bit of that, we don't like it. We feel uncomfortable. Especially when it's something that we had hoped for or that we had really tried hard to achieve. That can make it a bit harder, right? Well, so maybe someone else receives the recognition, maybe someone else is a bit more successful, succeeding in ways that we had hoped for ourselves. And then something inside us quietly whispers, "Why them? Why not me?" That's the voice of ego, the voice of self. And John's disciples were listening to that voice. John's response is a little bit surprising. He says, "A person can receive only what is given to them from heaven." In other words, everything we have comes from God. Every opportunity, every gift, every blessing comes from God. And if Jesus was drawing people, that wasn't a problem to John. That was God at work. And John reminds them of something that they should have already known, something that they should have remembered. He told them very clearly, you yourselves heard me say it. I am not the Messiah." And John had always been clear about that right from the very start. His role was never to replace the Messiah. His role was to prepare the way. John understood exactly where he was in God's plan. And because he understood that, he wasn't in the least bit threatened or a least bit concerned when Jesus began to shine, when Jesus began to baptize, when Jesus began to baptize more people than he was. And then John gives us a beautiful example. He starts talking about a wedding. He says, He who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears his voice rejoices greatly in the bridegroom's voice. Now, the friend of the bridegroom, I guess, is a bit similar to our best man. But back in those days, the friend of the groom had a very important role to play. He actually helped organise and prepare the wedding. When the bridegroom arrived, the friend stepped back because the day was not about him. The day belonged to the bridegroom. And John said, that's how I feel. Jesus is the bridegroom. And John simply is the friend, the best man, if you like. And when the bridegroom arrives, the friend steps back and doesn't feel jealous, but feels joy. The success of Jesus didn't threaten John. It fulfilled his purpose. And then John spoke those words that defined his whole ministry. He must increase, but I must decrease. John went on to explain why this matters so much. He said that the one who comes from above is above all. In other words, John knew exactly who Jesus was or where Jesus came from. John was a prophet, and certainly he was chosen by God in that role. But he was still just a man. He was from earth. Jesus, on the other hand, Jesus came from heaven. He speaks what he has seen and heard. He speaks the very words of God. And John says, the Father has given him the Spirit without limit, and the Father has placed all things in his hands. And that's why Jesus must increase, because he is not simply another teacher. He is the Son of God. So what does this mean for us? John's words invite us to ask a very simple, honest, and sometimes maybe a difficult question. Who or what is increasing in my life? Who or what is increasing in your life? Because, something is always increasing in our lives. Sometimes it might be our ambitions. Sometimes it might be our reputation. Sometimes it's our worries, our fears, or our need to be recognised. But our Christian lives moves gently forward in a different direction, or certainly should be. Little by little, often in the quiet moments, Jesus grows greater in our hearts. And somewhere along the way, we find ourselves being less tangled up in ourselves. This doesn't mean that we think poorly of ourselves. It doesn't mean we think badly of ourselves. But I guess it helps us understand the uniqueness of who we are. But it does mean that we think more deeply about Jesus and Jesus' impact in our lives. It means we can rejoice when others succeed. It means we are content to serve without being noticed. It means we measure our lives not by recognition, but by faithfulness. And this is actually where the real joy begins. John didn't become bitter when people started following Jesus. He became joyful because the purpose of his life was being fulfilled. And that's the freedom that comes when we stop trying to be the centre of everything. When Christ becomes the centre, our lives begin to settle into their proper form. Our work becomes service, our success becomes gratitude, and even our struggles become places where Christ can grow in us. John lived with remarkable clarity. He knew exactly who he was, and he knew exactly who Jesus was. And because he knew that, he was able to say, genuinely, with real joy, he must increase, but I must decrease. He must become more important, and I must become less important. And this isn't just a statement about John's ministry. It's a statement, I guess, about Christian life in general. The more Jesus grows in our lives, the less room there is for pride, for ego, and for self-importance. And that is where real joy begins. So perhaps the question for us today is very simple. Who or what is increasing in your life? Again, your ambitions, your plans, your recognition, or Jesus? Because as Jesus really becomes greater in our lives, everything else finally falls into the right place. More of Jesus and less of me. That was John's message, and it's still the path to a fulfilling life for us today. Rob, would you like to just duck in and tell Katie to start getting the kids ready to come in? So. And so as we finish this morning, I want to leave you with that one simple question. Who or what is increasing in your life? Think about that for one moment. Who or what is increasing in your life this morning, today, yesterday, this week, last week? Is it your plans? Is it the things that worry you in your life, the things that concern you? Is it the ambitions and the things you might be dreaming about for your future? Is it your reputation? Is it recognition? Or is it Jesus? Think about that one really honestly, because we can't hide. John understood something that some people never discover. Life becomes clearer, life becomes freer, life becomes fuller when we let Jesus take the centre of our lives. So perhaps the prayer we need to carry into this week is very simple. Lord, be greater in my life. Greater than my pride. Greater than my fears. Greater than the need that we have to be noticed. Jesus, help me to live the words that John spoke. He must increase and I must decrease. And when that becomes true in our lives, we can be confident. We can be confident that everything else starts to fall into its proper place. That's why it's important. That's why this fundamental message that John shares is so important back then, and is still so fundamentally important to us today here in this place. We're going to move into communion. Let's make sure I've got my